All right, welcome everyone to another session. If you remember from the previous video, we went through an exercise of creating an AWS organization and setting up the Identity Center. Now, in this session, we will continue with the Identity Center, go through and recap what we set up. So, initially, we set up the Identity Center and we had created a user and we granted that user access to an AWS account, and the permissions were administrator access. So we created a permission set. Now, I want us to focus on getting this identity center integrated with Azure AD and Azure Entra, right? Azure Entra is gaining popularity from last few years in setting up identity provider for identity center. Why that is important and why that helps is most of the corporate setups are already using Microsoft Active Directory, which integrates well with Azure Entra and thereby syncing the existing users from the existing corporate network into AWS. And you don't have to manage the users, you don't have to create the users or update them. If you look at the user that we created the other day, it was created manually. But our intent now is to use the users directly from Azure Entra. So in this exercise, I have also a free account from Azure where we would be setting up an enterprise application using Entra ID. We will set up a user. We will see how the single sign-on works with Azure Entra as the identity provider. All right. Before that, I want to show you the URL. If you go to the settings, you will again find the URL, which is a random string.awsapps.com/start. You can actually customize this in a more friendly string or domain. You can have a subdomain. So let's go with corporate aws.awsapps.com/start. This is much human readable and easy to remember. But remember, you can also set up an internet-based CNAME so that you can easily access your access portal from your corporate network without any challenges. Remember, once you set this, as on date, there is no way you can revert it back. So just an FYI, the only way to revert it back is to delete the instance, which is the identity center settings, and you have to redo the identity center. So it's not recommended to change it again because you can't. And even if you set it to something that you don't require in the future, you can always CNAME your access portal URL to the right subdomain. So let's change it to corporate AWS. So let's see if that domain is available. And I think we are able to save it. So we are calling it corporate-aws.awsapps.com/start. So let's go to that link, click on that link, and it takes you to the access portal. And here is where you put in your username. Now, right now, if you look at the identity source is Identity Center Discovery. We would want to change the identity source as the next item. So we change the identity source to external identity provider. All right. So this option, Active Directory, is if you are using managed Active Directory within AWS, which is a product, if you go to the Active Directory service, this is where you set up your AWS managed directory service, and that is when you select the second option, right? In our case, we're using an external identity provider which is hosted on Azure. So we would be selecting this and we'll go next. All right. All right, so configure external identity provider. Your identity provider requires the following IAM Identity Center certificate and metadata information to trust the identity center as a service provider. So we will download the metadata file, which would be helpful to share and upload this metadata directly into Azure. Now, so this metadata file, once you download, you go to Azure. So from here, we would set up an enterprise application, right? So let's go to enterprise application. Now, to set up an enterprise application, you select new application and it opens up an Entra app gallery. There are predefined templates available from AWS Amazon Web Services. Now you have to select the right one. So gone were the days when you would set up your SSO against a single account. This is the template. If you just have a single AWS account, then you select this, right? When you select this, you will see that this app template is only allowing you AWS single account access. But this is not what we want. We want our integration at the identity center level. So we will go back and try to find out an application which works for our use case, which is Identity Center. So let's search for that. There you go. So that is what we need. So let's configure that. Let's give it a logical name. So we will call it Corporate AWS. And we'll say create. Now that will create an enterprise application which we have to obviously configure with our users, right? We'll allow it to create. It's under provisioning state right now. And it is now created. So this is how it looks like once you create an enterprise application. The next step would be to create the configuration for single sign-on, right? Now within the single sign-on, let's read through this. Single sign-on adds the security and convenience when the users sign in onto the applications in Microsoft Entra ID by enabling a user in your organization to sign into every application they use with only one account, right? So you don't have to create a specific AWS credential to log into AWS. That is the use case we are trying to solve here, to showcase how the corporates are actually using single sign-on to get access to AWS. So now let's select the option SAML. That is the most standard operating solution that the corporates are using. So let's look at what options we have here. So we have upload metadata file. Remember, we have downloaded the metadata file from Identity Center. So once you upload the metadata file, you're pretty much avoiding any manual configurations. So it's much more faster. Okay. So the next step is to go through the SSO implementation guide. They have a configuration guide. So let's take a look at that. So the guide actually takes you through each and every step. In this case, the prerequisites is you need to be an application administrator or a cloud application administrator or an application owner to be able to configure the single sign-on. If you're part of the Azure team or if you're part of the AWS team, you might have to make sure that you either request for configuration of this enterprise application or you do it yourself by acquiring the rights of one of these three roles, right? Whichever is feasible. You still need an organization set up with another account delegated as an Identity Center administrator account, all right? We haven't reached there, but in one of the follow-up videos, I will also show you how to delegate the Identity Center service into an Identity Center administration account. So let's use the management account right now to continue our configuration. So we have that. And AWS Identity Center enabled on the delegated Identity Center administration account. We have that too. we are going to add the AWS IAM Identity Center from the gallery. So we have done this already. We signed in, we selected Entra ID, we created the new application, we added IAM Identity Center app, and we have configured the application. Then the next step is uploading the metadata file. So let's read through this, right? Configure and test the Microsoft Entra SSO with Identity Center using a test user called bSimon. For SSO to work, you need to establish a link relationship between a Microsoft Entra user and the related user in AWS IAM Identity Center. To configure and test the Microsoft Entra SSO, perform the following steps. All right. We will be creating a Microsoft Entra test user. We'll use a name there, and we'll assign the Entra test user, to the application, right? Let's move forward. Configure the Microsoft Entra SSO. Sign in to the admin center, right? Browse to Entra ID, Enterprise Apps, single sign-on. We are already there. Point number 5 is select upload metadata file. This is where we are. So I just uploaded the file already, and I'll just need to add it now. Okay, so the SAML file upload is complete. I have the entity ID all filled up through the metadata file. Sign on URL is optional, relay state is optional, and logout URL is optional. So we'll keep everything as default for the purpose of this session. And let's move to the next step. Once the metadata file is successfully uploaded, the identity and the reply URL values get auto-populated, which it did. If you don't have the service provider metadata file, perform the following steps on the basic SAML configuration. This is what we automated through the metadata upload. In the identifier text box, type a URL using the following pattern. Right, this is the identifier and this is the reply URL. Right, so this is the identifier and this is the reply URL. Then select the set additional URLs and perform the following step if you wish to configure the application in SP initiated mode. Identity Center application expects the SAML assertions in a specific format, which requires you to add custom attribute mappings to your SAML token attributes configuration. The following screenshot shows the list of default attributes. Okay, so these are the set of attributes that you have to make sure your Azure Entra user is following, right? So let's save this configuration. That is your basic SAML configuration. Again, this was easier for us because we uploaded the metadata file that we downloaded from the Identity Center screen. So the first step is complete, right? Then we go to the next step, attributes and claims, right? We need to have given name, the surname, the mail. All of this attributes needs to be there in a particular user, right? Then only the SAML assertion would complete, all right? So let's confirm that. We have that as default. On the setup single sign-on with SAML page, in the SAML signing certificate section, find the Federation metadata XML and select download to download the certificate. So we'll just go ahead and download that. All right, let's go and check. Set up the corporate AWS at step 4. You will need to configure the application to link with the Microsoft Entra ID. So now I have a new XML file which I need to go and upload into the Identity Center. And that is clear. Now on the setup AWS Identity Center section, copy the appropriate URLs based on your requirements, and then we move forward from there. Back to the AWS account, and this is where we downloaded the metadata file. I just uploaded the corporate AWS 1.xml file, which I downloaded from the identity provider, in our case Azure. Now we'll go click next. All right, so we just completed step 1, which was external identity provider selection. That was external. Service provider metadata, we just uploaded that, right? Just a couple of acceptance that you have to do before you move forward. So we'll just go ahead and say accept and change identity source. All right, so let it configure. And now the changes that we are going to see here is we have enabled the SAML 2.0 authentication. And if you go back to the settings page, right, we still have corporate aws.awsapps.com/start. Now let's check what happens when you click on this. All right, it's logging in. It is trying to federate and something went wrong. So it is trying to federate and log in through the SSO of Azure instead of directly landing into the access portal. Now we have an authentication provider, an identity provider in between, which is Azure. So we need to complete the authentication from Azure. Once Azure authentication completes, that's when I pass the gate. Okay, so let's move forward and check what are the next steps. All right, so we just completed 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Now we need to test the single sign-on with corporate AWS. Test to see if the single sign-on is working. We already tested it. In this case, it is asking us users will need to be added to the users and groups before they can sign in. So you can still simulate from here, try to test it. To ensure that the single sign-on works for your application, we recommend using the testing capability in the last step, which is what we're doing. Would you like to test now? Yes. All right. So test the single sign-on configuration for corporate AWS by signing in here. Ensure that you have configured both the Microsoft Entra configuration and corporate AWS itself, right? To test as your current user, which is me, right? Which is the admin, right? To test as another user, I have to make sure that I add the right user, right? So test another user, open this experience in a new tab in your browser. In that new tab, sign into the current portal with the user you would like to test sign in as. Then in that new tab, select test sign in. So right now, if I click on this, let's see. It takes me and should give me the same error, right? Okay. So now we should go and set up the provisioning. Okay, so let's take a look at the provisioning. All right, so what does provisioning mean to us, right? So this will allow us to automatically provision users that are assigned to this enterprise application to be synced on the identity center. So right now, the only user that I have does not make sense as of today because we have changed our identity provider or identity source to external identity provider, which is Azure. So this user does not make sense and it would not work for us. What we need is to sync users into identity center. And how would we do that? We have to enable provisioning, right? So if you go back to AWS account settings under identity center, you would find automatic provisioning. When your identity source is set to an external identity provider, you can configure how best to provision all your users and groups into the identity center so that you can make assignments to the AWS account. So that's exactly what we will do now. We'll try to enable this and let's see how to integrate this automatic provisioning. So automatic provisioning was successfully enabled. There was just one click of a button. Download or copy the access token, as this is the only time it will be shown. All right, so you have to make sure that you copy the token and the SCIM endpoint, right? So the SCIM endpoint is something that we have to configure on the Azure side. So let's look at what we have here, right? So we go to provisioning, connectivity. Let's go back to overview. All right, So it says provide the credentials to connect your application and test connectivity. All right, the tenant URL. In our case, it would be the IPv4 only. We'll select that. And the secret token is going to be the secret token that they have shared with us. Let me just paste it here. All right, I'm just going to test the connection and see if that works. Provisioning test connection test for corporate AWS was successful. So I'll just create the provisioning configuration. So this is the endpoint which would be used for automatic provisioning. This is called as SCIM provisioning. So I'll create the provisioning configuration which would set that up. And it's okay if I close this because I have set it up, right? So close. Now let me refresh this page. All right, so under the authentication identity source, if you look at the provisioning method, which was previously manual, if you have noticed, now is changed to SCIM. Okay, so SCIM is the method that we are using to provision all of our users that are assigned to the enterprise application. So let's go back to the corporate AWS enterprise application. Right now, users and groups, there is no assignment, which means there is nothing to provision. So let me just add a user. I will add myself and I will assign. All right, I just assigned myself. So if I go to provisioning, there is a setting that you can set which would sync every 30 minutes or 1 hour. So you can set up a sync delay based on which you can sync every hour or every periodic hour. So you can set up as per your requirements, right? So right now let's look at what else we can do here, right? So we have provisioning logs that will tell us if there are any errors during provisioning, if there are any API calls that are erroring out. The connectivity we have already set up, the configuration. It won't show you the secret token. And by the way, the secret token that you have set up, they do expire. So AWS alarms or alerts needs to be set up on the AWS side. Whenever these secrets are about to expire, you will get an alert on the Identity Center page, and then you have to go and renew or recreate your token or rotate your token as a best practice. All right, so now let's go back and try to provision. Let's see if we can do that. Yeah, so you go to provision on demand and you search for the user, and I want to provision my user. And if I click on provision, I am forcefully trying to provision this user through automatic provisioning connectivity that I have set up. So let's go back and validate how many users we have here, just to make sure we know the before and the after results. All right, so we only have one user. So let's go back to Azure Entra and I click provision. All right, so it's taking its own sweet time. All right, so it looks like the provisioning is complete. Now, what is the result of this? So let me go back to the users and see what happens here. So I need to refresh, and what I see here is a new user. And the difference here is it is created by SCIM. It is not created manually. Okay. This user which we have created manually was before the identity provider integration. All right. Okay. So now let's see if we can log in or not. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll close this and I'll try to land into the access portal through this URL, which is corporate AWS. Let's see where it takes us. it is trying to federate and it's still erroring out. So we need to troubleshoot what's going wrong with our integration. Look at let's actually take a look at the single sign-on settings. Let's go back to the portal and to enterprise applications, corporate AWS. Let's go to the mapping and check what is the exact mapping that we are giving here. So the user identifier that gets created on the identity center takes the username as the email. So we have to change this. We have to change this to the source attribute as user.email, right? So let's do that. User dot yeah, so let's select that as user.mail, so that when the SAML assertion happens, it sends back and claims for the user email instead of the user principal, right? Because the user principal is, let me show you, the user principal is of different pattern, right? So if you take a look at the users, let me open it in a new tab. This is the user principal, right? The user principal name, and it does not match with the username. That's the whole problem, right? So let's save this setting and retry to federate. All right, I'll close this. Let's go back to our settings, and from there try to open the start URL. Perfect. So we finally land to the access portal, and this time not through identity center user, but it is an Azure Entra user. So let me just sign out. And let's do a quick demo of adding a new user so that we do everything from scratch, right? But before that, let's check if you're able to still log in. Let's try it one more time. All right, perfect. So it works. Now what I'm going to do is, before we try to simulate with a new user, let's provide it some access, just like how we provided the previous user the access to the Learn Corporate AWS. Assign users. In this case, I will select Corporate AWS Landing Zone, say next, administrator access. All right. There you go. So I'm all set up, right? Now let's go back and use another user. I'm gonna sign out from here, and let's go back and check what is the state of the users here. Now I don't think we require this user at all, so we'll just go ahead and delete this. Now the only user that exists as of today is the one provisioned through the SCIM provisioning. Create another user and try out. Just an FYI, this user which I have created through corporate AWS Landing Zone at gmail.com is my root user on the Azure side. So let's try it with a regular user by adding it ourselves and see how that works. I already have a corporate user, so I'll just get rid of that and we'll recreate that again. Alright, has been deleted. Refresh. New user, create new user. Let's create a user called first user. Copy, display name, first user. I'll give a password. Okay, so let's go and set up the properties. First name, last name, and create. Let's make sure that we are also setting the email. I just want to copy the exact Microsoft account here, which we would be using to log in. Right. So every user I create in the Entra is going to be a Microsoft account, which would be allowed sign in to be able to authenticate and federate into the Access portal. So let's edit the properties, go to the contact information, update the email, and save. All right, now let's add this user to the enterprise application, corporate AWS, users and groups, add user, first user, select and assign. Next job is to provision the user into Identity Center. Let's confirm we don't have any users here. Provision on demand, and then we will select for first user and provision. Let's see. All right, the user is provisioned, so let's go into the Identity Center and confirm the same. We got our user here. Let's assign this user an account. So the user is assigned. Okay, so let's log in through incognito and try to log in into the Access portal. So this is our Access portal, corporateaws.aws.apps.com. Make sure you copy the user. And it should be on Microsoft.com, otherwise you would not be able to log in. So each user needs to be an actual login into the Microsoft.com, and these are the members of our tenant. These are not guest accounts, these are actual members, right? So we'll use the password here and sign in. I have to update the password, so the current password is alright. I just updated the password, so let's see where do we land into. We should be able to see the Access portal, and there you go. So we have landed just into the Access portal, from where we can actually log in as administrator to the AWS account. Alright, and now I am the administrator of the landing zone, so I can go into the Identity Center, confirm all the users, the settings as an administrator. I need not use my root account. I need to switch to North Virginia because that is our home region for the Identity Center. And there you go. These are our users. My user, which I'm logged in right now, is first user, and you should be able to see that the federation happened on the first user at corporate AWS Landing Zone Gmail. With that, we can conclude the session for Identity Center, how the corporates integrate the identity provider into Identity Center. From a setting standpoint, we have looked at customizing the endpoint of the start URL, Then we have changed the provisioning method to automatic SCIM provisioning. We have ensured there is a SCIM connection from Azure to Identity Center. We have also simulated a login using first user, and this is how it's all done in a corporate setup. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comment section or in the community section, and let's discuss further. Thank you so much for spending time on this video, and keep learning.